NASA isn't for kids like you, but 20 years later, you became NASA. Miss, I want to work for NASA. Malik, 12 years old, skinny, with eyes as bright as stars, stood up timidly in the middle of a crowded classroom. The other kids giggled. Some covered their mouth. The teacher didn't laugh, but sighed. Ms. Clara Whitmore, a famously strict science teacher, stood tall, her eyes fixed on the essay Malik had just read. NASA? Her tone was flat, neither high nor low. Malik, you should dream of something a little more realistic. You see, NASA isn't really a place for kids like you. The classroom fell silent. Jamal, Malik's twin brother, clenched his fists under the desk. That sentence didn't just kill a dream. It tore through the self-worth of a child still learning to believe in himself. 20 years later, the doors to the high school auditorium opened under shimmering lights. Two black men in navy suits, NASA pins on their lapels, walked slowly but commandingly down the rows of students. Ms. Clara Whitmore, now 68, sat in the front row of honor. When she saw them, she dropped the program from her lap, her hands trembling as if a cold wind had blown in from the mistakes of the past. Malik? Jamal? Their names slipped out of her mouth before she could swallow them back. The two men smiled and said just one thing. Do you remember what you once said about NASA? No one in the hall understood what was happening, but everyone felt something was about to be unearthed. Something big, a truth buried for 2 decades. A dream once drowned, now returning to illuminate an entire school. The NASA badge gleamed on Malik's lapel, catching the ceiling lights like a beam piercing through the fog of time. Jamal stood beside him, politely nodding at the school board, his eyes fixed on the silver-haired woman frozen in the seat of honor. Miss Clara Whitmore, the teacher who had haunted their childhood, couldn't utter a word. She never imagined she'd see those two students again. Not as the suspended boys of the past, but as grown men carrying the presence of a dream realized. Today, we are honored to return to our old school, the place that once taught us the hardest lesson about dreaming, Malik said in front of the auditorium filled with students, teachers, and guests. And today, we return to teach that lesson again, through our lives. Applause erupted, but no one smiled. The air was heavy, because those words, though deeply inspiring, carried a bitter undertone for the person who once crushed the hopes of 2 young boys. A forgotten heart and memories that refused to rest. Ms. Clara stood up, then immediately sat back down, as if the weight of time had just landed on her shoulders in a blink. The students around her whispered, "Do you know them? Did you really teach those two?" She didn't answer, but in her mind the past began to rewind. The essay, Malik's hopeful eyes, Jamal's silent grip, the careless, or perhaps intentional, words that stabbed straight into the hearts of 2 children. NASA isn't for kids like you. Their eyes are still the same, but now hold an entire universe. When the sharing session ended, the school board invited 2 outstanding alumni currently working at NASA into the honor room to prepare for the commemorative photo. And the person to take the photo with them was Ms. Clara. She entered with a forced smile. But before she could speak, Jamal gently said, "You don't have to say anything. We know, time changes many things, but some things must be faced, not forgotten." The room fell silent. Malik looked directly at her. "If you had just stayed silent that day, maybe we wouldn't have been hurt so deeply. But you chose to speak, and those words have stayed with me for 20 years." Ms. Clara turned away, tears welling up, not from anger, but from realizing she had never forgotten. Not for a single moment. October 2005. Science class, grade 6B, Jefferson Middle School, a reputable school in a suburban neighborhood predominantly white. A chilly morning, wind howling outside the window. But the real cold was inside that classroom. All right, today we'll read our essays on the topic, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Ms. Clara Whitmore's voice, a science teacher in her 40s, rang out as usual, cold, dry, and sugarless. A dream written in blue ink and belief. Malik sat in the back row, His silver-gray hoodie was fraying at the collar, sleeves slightly too long. A second-hand item from a charity store. In front of him was a handwritten essay, 3 pages, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. He'd stayed up until 11 p.m. the night before to finish it. No computer, no reference books, just his mother's old phone, a weak Wi-Fi signal, and an unshakable belief. One day, I'll work at NASA. And then, Malik was called to read. Go ahead, Ms. Clara pointed without looking up from her folder. Malik stood up, hands trembling. His voice was small but filled with excitement. My dream is to become an aerospace mechanical engineer. I want to work at NASA, building probes, space robots, and Mars exploration devices. As soon as he finished, a pfft came from the middle row. Quiet snickering spread, then turned into a wave of mockery. Haha, what is that? NASA? Who does he think he is? He thinks he's the Black Elon Musk? Maybe NASA's hiring spaceship janitors. It wasn't the essay they judged. It was the boy himself. Malik stood there trying to continue reading, but every word, aerospace, autonomous robots, only made the class laugh harder. He didn't know why, but Jamal, his twin, did. They weren't mocking the dream. They were mocking the dreamer, a poor black boy in secondhand clothes with a janitor mother in a dream too big for their worldview. And then, the most crushing blow didn't come from his classmates. It came from the one at the podium. Ms. Clara didn't intervene, didn't call for order. She just smiled faintly, set her pen down and said, "All right, that's enough," turning to Malik. Malik, dreaming is good, but sometimes you need to understand where you stand. NASA isn't a place you just go to because you want to. They require perfect grades, recommendation letters from professors, prestigious university degrees, and a suitable family background. She paused, glancing at his worn-out shoes, his torn backpack, and Malik's curly hair, then added, and some things that, unfortunately, you can't change. One sentence, one silent classroom, one broken child. Malik didn't react. He stood still like a statue, his eyes on his essay, once a treasure, now a ridiculous indictment. In the front row, Jamal clenched both fists, lips pressed tight, eyes locked on Ms. Clara. You're a science teacher. Your job is to spark fire in students, not pour cold water on their heads. The damage didn't come from insults, but from resistance. The next day, Malik and Jamal were summoned to the principal's office for behavior inappropriate toward a teacher. Ms. Clara reported Jamal for disrespect and Malik for disrupting class. No mention of the mocking laughter. No mention of the phrase, "things you can't change." Result, both brothers were suspended for 3 days. A disciplinary note was sent home, and their mother, Denise, cried on the doorstep as she opened the letter. She read, said nothing, just hugged her sons tightly and whispered, "I'm sorry. I was wrong to think this school would be different." Malik's last memory of that school wasn't the class reunion, not the playground, not his report card. It was the look of disdain on the teacher's face as she folded his essay without reading the second page. The page where he had written, "NASA needs people who believe the world can be better if we're brave enough to explore it. I don't have a dad, I don't have money, but I have imagination, and I won't give it up, no matter who tells me to stop dreaming." 2006, Edison High School, a poor neighborhood in the south end of the city. No welcome ceremony, no circle of friends. No one asked their names, just a lonely bell and unfamiliar glances. Malik and Jamal, after being suspended from Jefferson, transferred to a school rarely mentioned in any rankings. Here the science lab ceiling leaked. The computers ran on Windows so old they reset themselves when YouTube opened. Teachers rotated constantly, but they didn't know that on the 3rd floor, room D2, a teacher had been waiting for them for a very long time, Mr. Lucas, a man with greasy hands and a heart scarred by prejudice. Lucas W. Bernard, 58 years old, black, salt and pepper hair, a voice deep like an old radio. Once a mechanical engineer for a private satellite company, he walked away from his career after being left off a recognition board Despite creating the final draft of the project, he chose to teach at a poor school, not out of passion, but because he knew where kids were left behind. Someone had to stand in between. NASA, huh? Then do you even know what Delta V means? The first time Malik mentioned NASA during self-study, Mr. Lucas didn't laugh. He didn't doubt. He just asked briefly, then started sketching diagrams of gravity, orbit, and flight dynamics on a whiteboard with a nearly dried-out marker. Malik stared wide-eyed. Jamal held his breath. Delta V is the change in velocity needed to perform a navigation maneuver in space, Malik answered. Exactly, the teacher nodded. Now, if you learn more about that, you can dream even bigger, but you've got to get it right first. A cold storage room turned into a secret lab. No one knew that behind the rundown classroom block, Mr. Lucas had transformed an abandoned storage room into a robot prototype lab. He sourced mechanical parts from a familiar auto shop, grew miniature solar panels himself, and turned scraps into teaching tools. I know we don't have money, Malik said. We don't have powerful computers, no big library, no sponsors. But I have ideas. I have designs. Mr. Lucas didn't answer. He just nodded and handed him a flathead screwdriver. NASA doesn't need people who come from privilege. They need people who reach it despite not having privilege. And so they began. Mornings, school. Afternoons, homework at their mom's laundromat. Evenings, sneaking into the storage room, building chassis, programming Arduino, assembling robot wheels using old CD drives. Mr. Lucas fixed each weld, reviewed every line of code, encouraged even their smallest breakthroughs, a plastic trophy and a glance that changed a life. The Regional Science Fair, May 2008. Malik and Jamal presented a terrain survey robot model, designed to move across rough surfaces using infrared sensors for autonomous navigation. One judge, upon hearing the presentation, asked, "Are you sure you built this yourselves?" "I mean, this model seems a bit advanced for what students here are capable of." They stayed silent, but Mr. Lucas stepped forward. "I'm their supervising teacher, and if you need proof, I have all the sketches, test videos, and their work schedule. If this seems hard to believe, that's only because you've never believed kids from this school could do this." Malik would never forget the look in his teacher's eyes. He wasn't defending them. He was forcing the world to re-examine its own prejudice, recharting the dream and resetting the trajectory. That summer, Malik received his first STEM scholarship from a small nonprofit organization. Jamal published his first science article in a national student magazine. Two kids once expelled for daring to dream were now taking small steps back into orbit, but they never forgot that old sentence. NASA isn't for kids like you. In the fall of 2010, Malik and Jamal entered their senior year of high school with quiet determination. No honors ceremony, no persistent career counselors, no PTA board parents funding their path, but they had thick portfolios of self-built science projects, a region-winning robot model, and a recommendation letter from a former mechanical engineer, one who had once been passed over for promotion solely because of his skin color. Most of all, they had something no school could teach: unwavering resolve born from old wounds. Every time he filled out a college application, Malik reread his 6th grade essay. He didn't rewrite it. He kept every line, every grammar mistake as proof. This wasn't a new dream. It was one that had been ridiculed. Jamal took a quieter path. While his brother buried himself in formulas and technical drawings, Jamal poured himself into a series of essays on the psychological effects of school-based bias on Black children. One essay was selected for a national student journal. Another went viral on an education blog with over 12,000 shares in a week. They couldn't afford SAT prep, but they practiced late at night using an old laptop and borrowed Wi-Fi from a neighbor. They had no industry mentors, but they figured out how to write a proper statement of purpose and cold emailed MIT, Stanford, and Georgia Tech alumni. People who helped simply because they saw themselves in the boy's story. By March, 3 thick envelopes arrived. Both were accepted. Malik to MIT for aerospace mechanical engineering, Jamal to Stanford for information systems and software engineering. Their mother, Denise, was speechless. She simply placed both letters on the altar beneath a photo of her late husband, the man who once said, If I can't take our sons to another planet, then I'll at least pass them the spirit to reach one. Freshman year wasn't easy. Malik felt out of place among wealthy students discussing their summer in Europe or internships at Lockheed Martin since high school. He had never heard of networking, had never eaten sushi, and often borrowed old textbooks instead of buying new ones. But in every lab, Malik was always the last to leave. He didn't speak much, but when the 3D printer jammed or the simulation software crashed, everyone turned to him. Jamal became a core member of an interdisciplinary AI research team. He didn't have the social energy of his peers, but his systems thinking ability made even his supervising professor say it was rare to find. Every line of code, every paragraph he wrote reminded him, if he hadn't stood up for his brother that day, they might have stopped dreaming altogether. In their sophomore year, both won the National Honor Scholarship for outstanding Black students in STEM. In junior year, they were interviewed and selected for NASA's summer intern program. Malik joined the team developing landing equipment for the Artemis lunar mission. Jamal joined the department optimizing satellite data transmission. On their first day at the Space Center, they didn't take selfies. They didn't call home in tears. They just silently stood in front of the NASA Johnson Space Center sign as if trying to etch it into their hearts. Because in this very place, the two boys once expelled for dreaming were now being welcomed as peers. Every evening, they sat on the dorm porch, looking up at the dark sky and talking about everything, except what happened at Jefferson. No one mentioned Ms. Clara. No one spoke of the contempt in her eyes or the classroom laughter, but both knew they had never forgotten, not for revenge, but because they knew that one day they would have to return, not to demand justice for themselves, but to create justice for the kids who still dared to dream, just like they once had. And that day finally came. An invitation from Jefferson Middle School was sent to the email addresses of Lead Engineer Malik Thomas, NASA, and Jamal Thomas, Satellite Data Specialist, NASA. It was for the honoring successful alumni ceremony celebrating the school's 75th anniversary. The sender, the new school board, and on the list of honored guests was one name that made both of them pause for a moment. Ms. Clara Whitmore, distinguished science educator, former head of Applied Sciences Department. Malik was silent for a long time. Jamal looked at his brother, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said just one thing. Let's go. The dream had taken flight. Now it was time for it to return to the place it was shot down. The Jefferson Auditorium was more radiant than usual that day. Red and white ribbons hung from the ceiling, balloons sparkled, and the speakers played a nostalgic tune from 20 years ago. A massive banner read, "Welcome back to our great alumni." But no one in the organizing team anticipated that the two names at the center, Malik and Jamal Thomas, NASA engineers, were once the boys who left this school in silence and shame, carrying a suspension notice and a shredded dream. They walked in, together. Not with noise, not with bodyguards or media, just sharp suits, steady eyes, and a NASA emblem shining on their lapels. At that very moment, the woman in the seat of honor, silver-haired, slightly hunched, eyes trying to mask confusion, looked up. Ms. Clara Whitmore, the one who once stood at the podium, looking down at a 12-year-old black boy with a mixture of pity and disdain, now let the program in her lap slip to the floor. No one but them noticed the slight tremor in her face. No one but the three of them understood that the chill crawling up every spine in that warm auditorium wasn't from the AC. It was from a memory that had never been resolved. The ceremony began. The school board members took turns speaking, recounting the accomplishments of alumni, doctors, lawyers, athletes, then paused. They introduced the most special guests of the day, representatives of dreams, intellect, and perseverance, the Thomas brothers, currently working at NASA. The whole auditorium rose to applaud, but one person didn't stand, and another didn't clap. That was Clara and Jamal. Malik stepped onto the stage. He smiled softly, nodded, then began. Thank you to the teachers and the school for the invitation. It's strange, standing here, in this old auditorium, looking at the tube lights, the wooden podium, the velvet curtain, all still the same, Only we have changed. The room went silent. Malik scanned the audience, then paused where Clara sat. We studied here 20 years ago, but no one in this auditorium remembers. Because we didn't leave with medals or yearbook photos, we left in silence and in tears. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jamal stepped up beside his brother. Back then, we were suspended for speaking a dream deemed far-fetched, unrealistic, and maybe inappropriate for a poor black child in old clothes. The room froze. Malik continued, not raising his voice, not angry, but each word seemed to peel back the veneer of polite pretense. That day, a teacher told me, NASA isn't for kids like you. I don't know if she remembers today, but I remember, and I carried that sentence into every exam, every rejection, every late night in the lab, and even into the day I signed my contract with NASA. At that moment, Miss Clara stood. The entire auditorium watched. She slowly walked to the stage, her eyes no longer avoiding. She looked at the two men before her, no longer children, but grown men shaped by a pain she caused. Her voice trembled but was clear. Yes, I was the one who said that, and I was wrong. Not just wrong for underestimating a student, but for letting prejudice and pride guide the conscience of an educator. No one said a word, but some eyes were wide. Some whispers broke the hush. Clara lifted her chin, as if she had nothing left to lose. I'm sorry, not just for the words I said, but for not standing up when you needed someone to believe in you. I should have been the one to hold that dream, not crush it. Malik didn't nod. Jamal didn't bow, but they were silent. Not out of satisfaction, but surprise. She didn't have to do this. No one made her stand before hundreds and admit her fault, but she did. Then Jamal took the mic. You're right. Back then, we needed someone to stand for us, but no one did. So, we learned to stand for ourselves. And today we're here, not to reclaim the past, but to give something to the future. He looked toward the students seated below, the ones still dreaming, still unsure who to fear or trust. Don't let anyone tell you your dream is too far, too foolish, too big for someone like you. NASA or anywhere else always has a place for those brave enough not to quit. The whole auditorium applauded, not explosively, but firmly, rhythmically. No one remembered who clapped first, but everyone felt something had truly shifted. In the crowd, a small black student in a worn uniform, eyes gleaming, turned to a classmate and whispered, "Tomorrow I'm going to write about my dream of becoming a scientist." And that was when everything began to change. Not from the podium, not from the honor board, but from a reunion that seemed just ceremonial, yet became the day truth was admitted and a dream reborn. Malik, Jamal, and Clara stepped off the stage. Three people who once stood on opposite sides of a mistake now walked the same path. No more distance. Only one choice remained. Instead of forgetting, we choose to face it. And instead of revenge, we choose to forgive. The ceremony ended. Guests slowly filed out of the auditorium. But in a small meeting room behind the stage, Malik and Jamal were invited to a private conversation with the school board, a polite invitation from the school's new principal. The room was bright, clean, with bottled water and a plate of cookies. But in the air, something lingered, like a knot that had waited 20 years to be untied. Malik sat first, placing a thick envelope on the table. "Before we leave," he said, "I want to leave something behind. Things no one here has ever looked at." Jamal nodded, opened his laptop, and pulled up a storage file. On screen, dozens of documents, emails, notes, and scanned papers, all linked to Jefferson's past. The principal, an Asian American woman who had taken over 3 years ago, frowned. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Jamal took a deep breath. "Our story wasn't just about one teacher's mistake. It was the product of a system quietly designed to push kids like us to the margins. Through grades, through attitude, through intentional indifference." Malik pulled out a copy of the 2005 internal admissions report. a document they had spent nearly 6 months recovering from a retired administrative staff member. It included an analysis of rejection rates based on race, household income, and geographic location. The year we applied for Jefferson's 6th grade, he said, there were 11 applications from Black students for the advanced class. Only one was accepted, United States. And we only got in because one teacher on the board fought hard against the idea of whitening the entire advanced class. That teacher was transferred the following year. The principal stayed silent. Jamal continued. It didn't stop there. When we started performing well, scoring high on math assessments, some parents began complaining. I have screenshots of emails sent by a group of parents whose kids were in our class. One line said, "It's hard to understand why my child has to share a classroom with kids who don't come from the same cultural and family background." The principal's face paled. Another teacher, now the vice principal, looked toward Clara, who had been silent the whole time. But this time she didn't look away. "I knew about it," Clara said. "Back then, I didn't speak up because I was afraid. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it would pass. I was wrong." Malik, gently but firmly. "Silence is an action too. You know that, don't you?" She nodded, slowly. Jamal moved to the next slide, an internal teacher evaluation sheet for students from 2005. In it, under leadership potential and outstanding qualities, the notes beside Malik and Jamal read, "Lacking appropriate cultural foundation and tends toward unrealistic aspirations." No one objected. This wasn't an accident. It was an unspoken policy, a silent filter designed to ensure that only the right-colored, right background, right neighborhood kids got the push. The silence stretched so long you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner overhead. The principal exhaled, then said carefully, "I can't change the past, but I want to listen. I want to know. What should we do now to make this right?" Jamal looked at Malik. They exchanged a glance. Then Malik spoke, without hesitation. "Instead of hanging photos of successful alumni on the walls, create a scholarship for students labeled as having inappropriate backgrounds. Revise the advanced class admission policy, make the data transparent, and hire teachers, not for who they know, but for what they believe about the kids they teach." The principal nodded, this time genuinely. "Done. I'll bring it to the board meeting. And would you two be willing to join us?" Jamal smiled. "We've been ready for 20 years. "Clara," she said nothing more. But before leaving the room, she handed Malik a small envelope. "I found this while cleaning my old drawer last week," she said. Inside was Malik's 6th grade essay. Crumpled pages, awkward handwriting, the first part marked up in red by a teacher's pen, but the final paragraph still clear. "Even though I don't know how to get into NASA, I believe every dream starts with daring to think it can be real." Malik held it, fell silent. Clara whispered, just loud enough for the three of them, "I wish I'd read that line back then." No one replied, but some forgiveness doesn't need words. Outside the meeting room, the school bell rang. A new class began. Kids shuffled into their rooms, somewhere among them. One might be dreaming of space, and this time maybe no one will laugh. 1 week after returning to Jefferson, in a quiet office at the Johnson Space Center, Malik sat by the glass window, looking out at the neatly trimmed lawns and young engineers wheeling prototypes through the halls. Everything here was clean, streamlined, and precise to the millimeter. A far cry from the peeling classroom wall where he once stood in 6th grade to read aloud. But in his mind now, there were no rockets, no satellites, no circuits. Only an old essay and a pair of eyes that had aged, but finally learned how to look back. He opened his email and sent a message titled, "The Lucas Bernard Scholarship for the Children Left Out of the Dream." Jamal stepped into the room holding 2 cups of coffee. "Done?" Malik nodded. "I sent it. They'll add it to Jefferson's website. Any student from 6th grade on can apply. No high GPA required. Just an essay and a dream big enough." Jamal sat down, looked at his brother. "We did it." Malik smiled. Not the triumphant kind, but the smile of someone who just dug through a mountain and found the seed buried long ago. 3 months later, they returned to Jefferson again. This time not for flowers or the stage, but to do what no one once did for them, sit and listen to other children's dreams. In a newly renovated classroom, now named the Lucas Bernard Innovation Room, they held interviews for scholarship applicants. One kid dreamed of being an architect to build houses on other planets. Another wanted to design video games to help autistic kids communicate better. A scrawny boy with glasses stood up and said his dream was to build a satellite just for my neighborhood. No one laughed. No one doubted. Jamal looked at Malik and smiled. We fixed that day. In the hallway, Clara watched from behind the glass. She didn't interfere, didn't teach. Sometimes she volunteered to help kids practice public speaking. She kept her distance, not from shame, but respect. She understood now. True redemption doesn't come from apologizing in front of a crowd, but from creating a space where the same mistake can never happen again. That afternoon, she stopped Malik and Jamal as they were leaving. She pressed a stack of folders into their hands, the essays from this year's students. I haven't graded them. I just wanted you to read them first. Malik asked, any kids dreaming of NASA? Clara smiled, a smile she never had 20 years ago. 3. 2 of them are girls. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Wow, it really is a new era. On the way to the car, Malik paused at the back lawn, the place where he and his brother were once dragged and mocked after science class. Now it had a small wooden sign that read, "Keep dreaming, then turn it into your reason to rise." Below it, the donors' names, Thomas Brothers and NASA Foundation. Malik whispered almost to himself, "This is our NASA, not the rockets, not the space stations, but the dreams that no one calls foolish anymore." The car pulled away from the school. On the radio, a host announced, a pair of African-American engineer brothers, once students in the inner city, have just launched a scholarship fund to help underprivileged children pursue science, technology, and space. No fireworks, no trophies. But across America, some kid would hear that and think, maybe I can too. And that was enough. Because sometimes you don't need to change the whole world. You just need to return a dream to the place it was taken and turn the place that once rejected you into the launch pad for the unimaginable. If anyone ever told you your dream was too far, too big, or not for someone like you, remember this. You don't need permission to dream. You only need the courage not to let it go. Because sometimes the most powerful answer isn't anger, it's returning with a badge on your chest and calm in your eyes and saying, I made it. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If something in here touched you, share it with someone who's ever been doubted or left out. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to reignite a dream that almost died.